Some lies don't begin with false statements. They begin with questions. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused, guilty, or strangely responsible for something you never did? Most people assume manipulation happens when someone tells a convincing lie. But watch carefully. The most skilled manipulators rarely start by speaking. They start by asking. A simple question, a seemingly innocent sentence, something that sounds reasonable on the surface. Yet, hidden inside that question is a psychological trap. A trap designed to control your emotions, distort your perception, and quietly shift power away from you. I am the Watcher. And here, in Shadow Insight, we examine the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior, the patterns most people see but rarely understand. The strange thing about people is that deception is rarely obvious. In fact, the most dangerous liars often appear curious, concerned, or even helpful. Their questions feel natural. Their intentions do not. Tonight, we will uncover 5 specific questions that manipulators and habitual liars frequently use to influence others without appearing aggressive. And more importantly, by the end of this episode, you'll understand the invisible psychological mechanism that makes these questions so effective, and why intelligent people fall into these traps every day without realizing it. If you've ever encountered someone who left you doubting your own judgment, subscribe to Shadow Insight, leave a comment below, and stay until the end. Because the final revelation may completely change the way you listen to people from now on. Have you ever wondered how many of your decisions were influenced by questions that were never really questions at all? Why would I lie about that? At first glance, it sounds reasonable. In fact, most people hear this question and immediately begin searching for an answer. They start thinking, analyzing, justifying, and without realizing it, they have already stepped into the trap. Watch carefully. A truthful person usually focuses on facts. A manipulative liar often focuses on your perception of them. Instead of addressing the contradiction, they redirect attention toward their character. Why would I lie about that? Notice what happens psychologically. The conversation is no longer about whether the statement is true. It becomes about whether the person seems capable of lying. And those are two very different things. Have you ever noticed how some people appear trustworthy simply because they look confident? Human beings naturally judge credibility through emotions before logic. A liar understands this instinct. That is why this question is so powerful. It silently pushes you to defend their innocence instead of examining the evidence. Imagine a common situation. You discover that a colleague hid important information. When confronted, they don't explain the missing details. Instead, they immediately respond, "Why would I lie about that?" Suddenly, your attention shifts. You begin considering motives. Maybe they have no reason to lie. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe you're being too suspicious. The facts slowly fade into the background. And that is exactly the objective. The question creates an invisible burden. Now you feel responsible for proving deception rather than simply evaluating reality. Most people never realize that manipulators rarely win by proving themselves right. They win by making you doubt your ability to judge. And once doubt enters the conversation, control often follows. The strange thing about people is that we are uncomfortable accusing others of dishonesty, especially when they seem calm, especially when they sound offended, especially when they ask questions that make us feel guilty for questioning them in the first place. On the surface, this question appears defensive. Underneath, it is often an attempt to move the spotlight away from the truth and onto your uncertainty. And this is only the beginning, because the next question goes even further. It doesn't make you defend the liar. It makes you defend your own memory. Are you sure that's what happened? Few questions are more dangerous, not because they sound aggressive, but because they sound reasonable. Have you ever wondered why this simple sentence can instantly make a confident person hesitate? Because memory is one of the easiest things to attack. Watch carefully. When someone directly denies reality, resistance appears immediately. But when they merely question your recollection of reality, your mind often begins doing the work for them. You start replaying events, searching for details, looking for possible mistakes. And while you're busy examining yourself, the manipulator gains time and control. This is why habitual liars rarely say, "That never happened." Instead, they prefer, "Are you sure that's what happened?" The difference is subtle, but psychologically it is enormous. One statement creates conflict, the other creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is where manipulation thrives. The strange thing about people is that most of us trust our memory far less than we think. Human memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. Every recollection contains gaps, and skilled manipulators know exactly how to exploit those gaps. Jung believed that people often struggle to separate what truly happened from the emotional meaning they attach to an event. A manipulator takes advantage of this weakness. They don't need to prove you are wrong. They only need you to wonder if you might be.
Imagine a conversation with a partner, friend, or coworker. You clearly remember a promise they made, a commitment, a statement, a specific moment. You bring it up. Instead of discussing the promise, they lean back and calmly ask, "Are you sure that's what happened?" Suddenly, certainty begins to weaken. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe they phrased it differently. Maybe your memory isn't perfect. Notice what has happened. The discussion is no longer centered on their behavior. It is centered on your reliability. The spotlight has moved. And once again, the manipulator controls the direction of the conversation. Most people think manipulation requires intelligence. In reality, it often requires something simpler, the ability to redirect attention. Every second you spend questioning yourself is a second not spent examining them. Have you ever noticed that some people leave every disagreement looking innocent, while everyone else leaves confused?
This is often the reason. They understand that confusion is more useful than persuasion, because a confused person stops resisting. And once someone begins doubting their own perception, they become far easier to influence. But the next question is even more revealing, because it targets something deeper than memory. It targets your fear of appearing selfish. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? This question appears harmless. Sometimes it even sounds mature, reasonable, calm. But beneath the surface, something far more subtle is happening. Have you ever noticed how certain people can hurt you, cross a boundary, break a promise, and somehow, a few minutes later, you find yourself defending your reaction instead of discussing what they did? Watch carefully. This is one of the oldest manipulation techniques in human behavior. The liar shifts the focus from the action to your response. The conversation begins with their behavior, but it ends with your emotions. And that is not an accident. Imagine that someone betrays your trust. You confront them. Instead of addressing the betrayal, they ask, "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" Notice the hidden message. They are not questioning the event. They are questioning your right to react. The implication is subtle but powerful. The real problem isn't what I did. The real problem is your reaction to it. And suddenly, guilt enters the room. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you're too sensitive. Maybe you're being unfair. The strange thing about people is that most of us desperately want to be seen as reasonable. We don't want to appear emotional. We don't want to appear dramatic. We don't want others to see us as difficult. Manipulators understand this instinct better than most. Adler observed that human beings constantly seek social acceptance and belonging. The fear of being rejected by the group is deeply rooted within us. A manipulator quietly weaponizes that fear. Instead of defending themselves, they make you fear becoming the unreasonable one. And many people immediately retreat, not because they were wrong, but because they fear social judgment. Have you ever wondered why some individuals repeatedly get away with the same behavior? Because they rarely argue facts, they argue perceptions. They make accountability feel socially uncomfortable. Over time, their victims begin censoring themselves. They stop speaking up. They stop questioning. They stop confronting. Not because the problem disappeared, but because challenging it now feels more painful than tolerating it. This is where manipulation becomes truly dangerous. Because once someone learns they can control your reactions,
They no longer need to control reality. They only need to control how you feel about reality.
Nietzsche once suggested that power often hides behind moral language, and nowhere is that more visible than here. The manipulator presents themselves as calm, rational, balanced, while quietly portraying you as emotional, irrational, and unstable. The roles reverse. The guilty person appears composed. The injured person appears problematic. And many observers never notice the switch. But the next question reveals something even darker. Because it doesn't target your memory, it doesn't target your emotions, it targets your deepest need for approval. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me? This is where manipulation reaches its most sophisticated form. Because a liar is no longer defending a falsehood. They are collecting a debt, or at least creating the illusion of one. Have you ever wondered why some people constantly remind others of their kindness? Not because they are grateful, not because they are generous, but because they want their past actions to become future leverage. Watch carefully. A healthy relationship allows accountability. A manipulative relationship converts accountability into guilt. The moment you question the person's behavior, they stop discussing the issue entirely. Instead, they present a list. Everything they have done for you, every favor, every sacrifice, every act of support. And then comes the question, after everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me? At first, it sounds emotional, almost vulnerable. But hidden beneath the emotion is a powerful psychological maneuver. The discussion is no longer about truth. It is no longer about honesty. It is no longer about what happened. It becomes a test of your loyalty. And that changes everything. Most people never realize that guilt is one of the strongest forms of social control. Unlike fear, guilt works from the inside. The manipulator doesn't need to pressure you. You pressure yourself. You begin remembering the good moments, the favors, the support, the kindness. And slowly, the original issue fades into the background. The strange thing about people is that we often confuse gratitude with obedience. We feel indebted. We feel obligated. We feel that questioning someone somehow erases everything positive they have ever done. But human nature doesn't work that way. A person can help you yesterday and manipulate you today. Both can be true at the same time. Freud often noted that human beings struggle to tolerate emotional conflict. We prefer simple stories. Good person, bad person. Victim, villain. But reality is rarely that clean. Manipulators understand this. That is why they force you into an emotional dilemma. If you continue questioning them, you feel ungrateful. If you stop questioning them, they avoid accountability. Either way, they win. Have you ever noticed how some people seem impossible to confront? Every disagreement somehow becomes a discussion about how much they have suffered, how much they have sacrificed, how much they have given. The spotlight never stays on their behavior for long. It always returns to their emotional value. And eventually, many people surrender, not because they were convinced, but because they became exhausted. This is the hidden truth. The most manipulators rarely seek to prove themselves innocent. They seek to make accountability feel morally wrong. And once accountability feels wrong, control becomes effortless. The strange thing about people is that the individuals who demand the most loyalty are often the ones most afraid of scrutiny. Because loyalty protects them, but scrutiny reveals them. And that leads us to the final revelation, the invisible mechanism connecting all 5 questions. The reason these tactics work on intelligent people every single day.
Throughout this episode, we explored 5 questions that appear harmless on the surface. Questions most people hear every day. Questions that sound reasonable, normal, even innocent. But as we have seen, their real purpose is often something very different. Not to understand, not to clarify, not to seek the truth, but to quietly reshape the conversation, to redirect attention, to create doubt, to weaken certainty, to gain control. Watch carefully. The first question made you defend the liar. The second made you question your memory. The third made you doubt your emotions. The fourth made you feel guilty for holding someone accountable. Different questions, different situations, yet all leading toward the same destination, your uncertainty. Have you ever wondered why these tactics work so well? The answer is simpler than most people realize. Because manipulators are not fighting against facts. They are fighting against confidence.
They understand some things that many people never notice. A person who trusts their own judgment is difficult to control. A person who constantly doubts themselves is not. And that is the hidden mechanism we promise to reveal. The true goal of manipulation is rarely to make you believe a lie. The true goal is to make you stop trusting yourself. Because once that happens, the manipulator no longer needs to convince you of anything. You begin doing the work for them. You question your memory. You question your feelings. You question your instincts. And eventually, you question reality itself. The strange thing about people is that we often assume deception is revealed through words. But human nature always reveals itself eventually through patterns. And patterns are much harder to hide. A single question means very little. A repeated pattern means everything. That is why the next time someone asks a question that instantly creates guilt, confusion, or self-doubt, pause, observe, ask yourself a different question. Is this person trying to understand me or trying to control how I understand myself? Because that answer may reveal far more than anything they say. I am the Watcher, and here in Shadow Insight, we explore the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior. If this episode made you see certain conversations differently, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue uncovering the truths that most people overlook, subscribe and join us for the next investigation. Because sometimes the most dangerous lies are never spoken directly. But what happens when the questions you trust the most become the very tools used to control you?